Okay, welcome back to part two. We're still talking about network security and we're starting the protection phase of the cycle. So in the protection phase, we care about things like access control, where you're guarding access to your resources. If you want to think of a guard standing there, authenticating people. Because what does a guard do? He stops you and says, "Halt! Who goes there?" And you have to identify yourself, and then the guard will ask you, "What's the secret password?" Because this was done in really throughout time, right? Any historical period. We've used passwords, usually verbal passwords, to get past guards, but now we just use text to prove that you're not, somebody else on the other end, since you can't see them is the problem. So password authentication is one way to authenticate yourself. It's the most common. Unfortunately, it's pretty easy to crack passwords, and we'll talk about that in person about how to crack passwords. Even if they're long. So really, just having a password isn't defense in depth. Passwords should always be complex. They should always be long. It depends on the system. You know this stuff. But if you're going to crack a password, well, you need probably two different tools. But the first tool you already know how to use in terms of packet capture. So with packet capture, you're gathering up all the packets and you break them open. And as you saw in the exercise, you can see the contents at layer 5, what somebody's typed. Now, if it's encrypted, it's going to look like gibberish, but you would need another tool to unencrypt it, and we're not going to talk about that just yet. In addition to passwords being crackable, the other problem is just low tech, that users are being told to do these long, complex passwords, and it's hard for them to remember. Don't use your dog's name, don't use your birthday, don't use something easy. So they just have to. It's a vicious cycle. Now they have to write them down. Now you're going around ripping Post-it notes off people's laptops and such, which I have done a lot of, especially with nurses and doctors. Oh my God, and just sitting there for all the world to see. Or I've been in lawyers' offices where in the lawyer's conference room where he brings his clients, he has all of his usernames and passwords on Post-it notes stuck to the wall. It's amazing. You like to think that people aren't that dumb, but there you go. Another thing, while we're talking about authentication, usernames and passwords, if you are ever asked to create a guest username, the response should be no. Not just no, but hell no, never. Or any kind of generic username, like just, we're going to have a big old training class. So if you could just create a username on the network called training and let everybody log in with the password train or classroom, just keep it all the same, let everybody log in that way, that would really help me out. Do not do it. Number one, depending on what industry you're in, you might be in violation of compliance legislation. But no matter what, it's dumb because you're just opening up a big old door and inviting anybody and everybody to come in. Another common one is, a vendor needs to get access to hop on our network. Can you just create a generic one called vendor and let all of our vendors log in that way? No, you cannot. Now, certainly there are ways I'm aware of that you can carve up your LAN and have a separate guest network and carve things up into a separate VLAN. I'm not talking about that. Just in general, it's a very poor security practice to ever use any kind of generic username. Therefore, I forbid you to ever do this. Other forms of authentication, fingerprint scanners, even retinal scanners, facial scanners. These are all kind of newer ways of doing authentication, but they are more expensive, and we're still testing them out. Adding another layer of security by using a digital certificate, though, is a very common and not too costly way to have better security. So now we're talking about defense in depth, basically, so that you have to know something, your password, and you have to have something. You know something and you have something. Whether it's a token, whether it's a certificate, you have something. Also known as two-factor authentication. So a digital certificate is something that has a public key a set of public and private keys. A digital certificate is something you have to buy from a certificate authority. Actually, if you're just on your local area network, you can set up your own certificate server on an Active Directory box or even LDAP in a Linux world. But usually you need these to work on the internet. So if you need it to work outside of your own local area network, you have to purchase one. In the past, I've used VeriSign. VeriSign was actually bought out by Symantec, which surprised me. This is a year, maybe even 2 years ago now, but I think just a year ago this happened. So you have two forms of credentials. Same way having a debit card and a PIN, you know something, i.e. your PIN, and you have something, your debit card. Knowing something and having something is two factors. And which kind of leads to, I can only discuss this with myself because you can hear me but you can't respond back. Why do we still use plain old usernames and passwords? If they're so horrible in terms of security. Well, I think there are two reasons. One's obviously money, right? It's cheap, if not free, to implement usernames and passwords. And the other reason is training. People around the world, no matter their age, understand how a username and password works. Whereas doing fingerprint scanning, facial recognition, this all requires retraining of our end users, which is a tricky proposition. So in the future, you guys might be using better forms of authentication, but for right now, we're still stuck in username and password land. So to continue the discussion of things we do to protect in the protection phase, firewalls, certainly a big deal. So firewalls work at layers 3 and 4. Layer 3 in that they're taking a packet at layer 3 and opening up the contents of the packet to look at the layer 4 contents to see what port it's going to. Ingress and egress are just fancy words for inbound, outbound. But we call it ingress and egress just to be fancy. And a firewall is a tricky thing because it's only going to block something that looks like a provable bad packet, something that's it follows a signature of being an attack or a denial of service attack or a virus that's got some kind of signature that indicates it's bad. If it can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that it's bad, it'll block it. Otherwise, it's just going to pass it. But it's kind of scary. So if there's any shadow of a doubt, it's not sure, the firewall is not sure, what's it going to do? It's going to let it through the door. Let's just pause and have a cold shiver at that idea, okay? But one thing that a good firewall does is stateful packet inspection, which is to look at the state that the packet is in. So it actually takes a lot of time to look at every single packet coming in your network, because as you saw in the packet capture utility, there are a lot of packets coming in. Now, imagine that was just on your computer. Now imagine looking at a firewall, what it's doing, just non-stop packets. Your firewall would blow up if it tried to examine every single packet. So instead what it does is just looks at the packets that are in a certain state. So just like this example, a phone conversation, there's the initial hello, starting the conversation state, and then we continue our conversation, and then we hang up. Well, all the conversation stuff, we don't have to kind of re-authenticate ourselves, right? We started the conversation, we're still talking, and once we say goodbye, there's no reason to authenticate or examine things more closely there. So it's just when you're saying hello, when you're opening up a connection for the first time, that's stateful packet inspection, when it opens up the packet at the initial open connection state, which is, of course, the riskiest stage of a connection, because later on in the conversation, it's too late at that point. So things like an access control list in a router or firewall, typically a firewall, that are going to have a list of rules of whether you allow or don't allow connections What is this saying? Not for the more numerous packets that do not attempt to open connection. So if it's not attempting to do anything, the firewall isn't going to take any action. But if it's trying to open an active connection, that's when it's going to step in and do a little more. Some other things that we can do in the protection phase is encrypt our data. CIA is a very common acronym. I've heard of the CIA acronym used for security more broadly, but I think specifically it just applies to cryptography that ensures confidentiality, message integrity, and authentication. CIA is what you're doing with encryption. Also, but it's rendering the message not impossible for somebody to figure out, but very, very difficult to figure out. Which is why I put the word casual here. I don't think it thwarts everybody, but somebody who just happens to be listening in and isn't trying too hard is going to block them from reading your packets. This just explains AES is a very common cipher for encryption. But really the two types that I want to focus on here, one is SSL TLS, one is IPsec. So the first type, SSL TLS, what layer are we talking about? If we're talking about TLS stands for Transport Layer Security. Transport Layer Security, what layer is that? 4, yes, you better have been saying 4, 4, 4. You've been shouting it at your laptop, your iPod, your whatever you're listening to this on. Anyway, layer 4. So anytime you buy something online, anytime you see HTTPS, and you see the little padlock icon in your browser, that's SSL TLS encryption. And it's easy to implement because it's just a matter of turning it on, but it is only for web-based applications. It is only for web-based applications. Just FYI, there's a web page out there you can test kind of the level of encryption of your SSL certificate. What's better than SSL TLS? SSL Secure Socket Layer. But TLS is the newer form, but old farts like me still call them SSL certs. IPsec is better. IPsec just stands for IP security as a cryptographic protocol, because it protects all the packets, not just ones going to web servers, but all kinds of traffic, going to your file server, going to your mail server, video, audio, whatever type of data is flowing over your network. This is typically used in a mobile VPN situation. It's very strong security. It's not that expensive, but it's a little more complex to set up because every device has have IPsec configured just the right way, and getting it configured just the right way on the client side and on the firewall side can take some, I would say, trial and error. But those are some kind of basic protection mechanisms. Now we're getting into, okay, somebody's gotten past our defense in depth, they've gotten past our comprehensive security somehow, and it happens all the time, right? How are we going to respond? Last stage. Holy crap, something happened. Whether you call it an incident, a compromise, a breach, because you pull down your breaches when it happens. When the bad thing happens, that's not the time to start planning. Hopefully that's an obvious point to everybody, and yet this catches people off guard in the real world all the time. There's my timer going off that I've already done 14 minutes. So I'll do one more of these videos and we'll talk about planning. And yeah, hang on, I'll be right back.